Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible.
Hello everyone. It's so good for you guys to be here with me today. Thank you for tuning into GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Crystal, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things, which are pets. You know, the furry or reptilian creatures we have in our home. Not the uninvited insects, of course, but, dogs, cats, fish, iguanas, bunny rabbits, cute little, maybe someone has like a really cute little chinchilla. Those are super soft. But we're going to be talking about how they help us, and I ended up going down this huge rabbit hole because I had this whole segment planned out for today's show, and then I thought, let's change it up a bit. So we've got some other things in here too that we talk about, like objects that we care for, how plants can have an effect on our being if, say, we can't have pets in our home, as well as a few other little goodies. So I'm very excited to share that with you today, of course. One of the first things that we're going to kind of dive into right now is how many pets that are really out there. So I found out that with over 470 million dogs kept as pets worldwide, dogs primarily came out on top as the leading pet in 2018. And within the same year, though, there were roughly about 370 million cats in the world as well. And some of that information has changed because I did find some websites that stated like how many types of pets per household. And this is from the III.org website, which actually stands for Insurance Information Institute. Quick side note, you can actually get health insurance for your pet. Now, I don't know if this applies overseas, in other places like the UK or Africa or Australia or anything. I'm presuming it does, but I do know in the US that you can purchase health insurance for your pet. So if they get sick or they need shots or emergency surgery, you are able to have some kind of coverage to help care for your loved one as well. So according to this website, right, the number of people that have birds is 5.7, and these are in millions. Cats are at 42.7. Dogs are at 63.4. Horses are at 1.6 million. Freshwater fish is 11.5. Saltwater fish comes in at 1.6. And reptiles and small animals round out the graph with 4.5 and 5.4 respectively. And just because I was curious about it, excuse me, I found out that the pet industry as of 2018, 2019 spends over $70 billion overall in expenses for, like food, supplies, over-the-counter medicine. That's a huge industry. Can you think about that? Over $70 billion a year in just pet care for like everybody. However, if you're looking to have just figures for yourself, let's say that you have a dog or a cat. Okay, those are like the top two main ones. If you do like surgical visits, routine visits, they can cost you just a few $100s, as well as food, treats. Boarding can be a little bit more expensive depending where you go. And then also if you give your dog or cat who may be older, vitamins, vitamins and nutrients to help them, those are still fairly inexpensive, running out under about $100 each. And those are for basic annual expenses. So it's not too pricey, but you also want to be making sure that whatever kind of pet you get, that it's good for the size of your home, it's good for you, and that you can afford it. And we will definitely get into that in a little bit. So what's interesting is that, we just talked about the type of pets and how many are there, right? But how many people actually have pets? Well, according to this, it's 67% of U.S. households, or about 85 million families, own a pet. And this is as of the 2019-2020 National Pet Owners Survey. Now, typically, there's no limit on a number of animals that you can have, provided that the animals are properly cared for and that they don't pose a nuisance, health or safety risk to other members of the community. But again, if you're living in an apartment or a small studio or a flat, maybe having a big dog or something isn't really the best idea. However, definitely discuss it with your landlord. If you rent, you don't want to be going around and breaking any rules now. And what's really interesting about this, right? We just said that there's no real limit on pets, but apparently, okay, and this is I thought interesting. Under current law, it's illegal to have more than 3 cats in a household, and people who want to have more felines must obtain a kennel permit. And I'm not aware if that is just by a certain state's law or if that's in general. Okay, apparently that was according to just Los Angeles, which I think that they're working on limiting it up to 5. But if you're in Nebraska, you can have 3 dogs and 5 cats. Pittsburgh can have a maximum of 5 pets within the city limits. Dallas, Texas, the number of cats and dogs depends on the size of the home and the surrounding property. And the District of New Zealand actually made international headlines when it passed an ordinance limiting pet owners to 3 cats. Now, the bylaw was implemented because the council had received numerous complaints concerning noise and odor in the air. So cities and countries can often get involved in pet ownership disputes with residents, and it's typically over the number of pets allowed on the property. Once our local governments, they really have to try to find a balance and in between with animal welfare and residents' freedom to keep the pets, because the noise, the odors, the property damage complaints, if you're not properly caring for your pets, can spark numerous debates and issues within the community. One of the editors at Canis Major Publications, a Normal Wolf, can be quoted as saying, "One dog that is irresponsibly owned can be a greater nuisance than 5 or 6 dogs who are properly cared for," which I think pretty much hits the nail on the head, because if you have one dog or cat that isn't trained and isn't respectful and isn't, somewhat limited as to how they behave or how they act, then definitely it could cause a disturbance. If your dog's barking at all hours of the night and you don't get home till 2-3 in the morning because you work overnights, it can be pretty much like a hassle at that point. You're just annoyed all the time, or the cat is constantly like in your yard tearing up stuff or running through your house or outside your window. Who knows, There could be any number of things that happen with that, but that's why a lot of people will look to a pet that is a lot quieter, say a goldfish or a betta fish, a type of iguana or snake. A lot of reptiles actually can be soothing as well for people, which brings us to part of our next segment. We're going to get into it here in just a second about how pet ownership can have an effect on mental health, but more on that in a minute. So, there's an estimated, right? I was curious, as one gets when they're researching things, what U.S. city has the most pet owners, and it's estimated that more than 2.6 million privately owned cats and dogs are in just Los Angeles alone. Whereas, like, for context, there's roughly 1.1 million pets in New York City. So it's quite the discrepancy. And the typical age group for people who own the most pets is about 40 to 54 years old. Now, about 64% of them own a pet. So not a lot of millennials, not a lot of Gen Zers. There's a lot of older people or middle-aged people who are, a little bit more set in their life. They have a consistent job. They have a set schedule. They can know when they will or won't be there for their pet. And I could understand how those statistics might be a little higher than, say, for a 20-something just out of college. You really can't afford much. You probably are trying to figure out where to live in the world. And those things probably aren't conducive to pet ownership necessarily, but there are people that have owned pets and been homeless. I've certainly done that. I've stayed in my car for a while because I needed to, save money for our house, and I had my dog, so we would just go everywhere together. We'd go to work, and we'd go hiking afterward, and we would make a whole thing of it, and it was probably one of the best times I've ever had. It was really great, You have this constant companion by your side who doesn't complain, doesn't get worried or anxious about it, and they're just, like, there to love you. They're just there to take care of you, and it's really comforting. And it also gives you a sense of responsibility as well, because you want to take equal or better care of that animal as well. From the walks that you take, to the food that you give them, to having them checked on regularly, of course. Responsibly spaying and neutering your animals is also something that you can look at doing, and that in itself is largely an attribution of people's factors, because they feel sometimes, I suppose, that when you have a pet that you don't necessarily need to take those steps. You don't want to hurt the animal. You don't want to take away its one thing, just by euthanizing it. However, owning a pet and making sure that it's not doing anything to is something that you can look at as well. And if you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to do it. That's your responsibility as a pet owner. I decided to have my dog neutered, obviously full shots and everything to be safe, because it's a legal requirement where I live. However, it did calm him down a little bit. He's pretty hyperactive. He's a border collie pit, and he's just a fantastic dog. I can't ask for a better animal to be able to love. So it's been really great. He just turned 2 actually this month. This is April 2021, and I think I'm gonna get him like a little birthday cake or cupcake or something. But yeah, he's so spoiled, and he's just the sweetest dog. But real quick, back to the whole euthanizing thing. I'm sorry, not euthanizing. Oh my goodness. Spaying and neutering. What am I talking about? If you can't afford it, or you're wondering how it works, call your local vets. Call your friends. Maybe they know somebody that's more affordable, and see what the information is about it. But don't be afraid to check something out and get the information behind it to be fully informed of what your rights are and how you feel about the situation in general. There is definitely an over excess of animals in kennels, in the streets. And part of that is because people were irresponsible. Part of that is because, there's a lack of knowledge when it comes to how to train a pet properly, how to care for them properly, the temperament that you use with them, the words that you use with them, how early you start training them. All of these things have factors and relations to how that pet comes out and how they grow up to be. Every once in a while, I'll get a pet that, for whatever reason, its temperament can be an issue, or it takes a little more training and whatnot to have it be a little more docile. But all in all, most people are happy with pets. And then there's conflicting surveys. Right here, it says that pet owners are less happy than Americans without pets. 56% of women got a pet, quotations, to keep me company, versus 48% for men, while 41% of men got a pet because a partner or a family member wanted it, compared to just 31% of women. And over 90% of people have had a pet at some point in their life, right? Just something interesting to think about why we do what we do and why we make these choices. So stay tuned for the next section where we talk about how pets make us happier, how they change us, and some really interesting facts about the Madman and the Professor movie, as well as plants and fish and lizards coming up.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Alright, and now we're going to get into health and mood boosting benefits of having a pet. And there's this really cute picture of, I'm not sure what kind of dog this is, but it's like a chocolate brown. It looks like a mixture of a Newfoundland and some kind of Cocker Spaniel mix. And he's just got these sweet little eyes looking up at this person's hands. It's petting him on his little doggy head. And there's the person's wearing this really warm sweater, so I'm assuming it's cold. But anyway, so most pet owners are clear about the immediate joys that come with sharing their lives with companions. But there's also a lot of physical and mental health benefits as well that accompany the pleasure of snuggling up with a furry friend. And recently, studies have begun scientifically to explore the benefits of the human-animal bond. And a lot of pets have evolved to become attuned to humans and our behavior and emotions. Dogs, for example, are able to understand many of the words we use, but they're even better at interpreting our tone of voice, our body language, and gestures. And like any good human friend, a loyal dog will look into your eyes and gauge your emotional state and try to understand what you're thinking and feeling. And also probably to work out whether they can have a treat or something, or a nice walk. So I can't blame them there. Now, pets, especially dogs and cats, can reduce stress, and they can reduce anxiety and depression as well. They also help to ease loneliness, encourage exercise and playfulness, and they can even help improve your cardiovascular system, or your cardiovascular health, I should state. And now, when you think about it, we just mentioned that 90% of people have had a pet at some point, but more specifically, when you're a child, having valuable companionship can help you grow up more secure and active. Perhaps most importantly, even for older adults though, a pet can add real joy and unconditional love to your life, right? And some of the ways that they do this are because pet owners are less likely to suffer from depression than those without pets. And again, owning a pet doesn't have to have just specifically dogs and cats. I know that it's primarily the thing that we think about because they're everywhere, but I also have friends that have snakes as pets. I have a couple friends who have like a whole farm. They have turkeys and pigs and, tons of dogs and stuff. And every one of those pets, they love just like their kids, or to my other friend who has an iguana. I just saw a video the other day of a guy who's got 2 pet lemurs. So, it's kind of crazy. And we'll talk a little bit about exotic pets and everything in a minute. But going back to our health and our mental impact. So, people with I lost my spot. So even when you go to the dentist or something and you watch fish in an aquarium, it can actually help to reduce muscle tension and lower your pulse rate. And people who have pets also do have lower blood pressure in stressful situations than those without pets. One study even found that when people with borderline hypertension adopted dogs from a shelter, their blood pressure declined significantly within even just 5 months. And when you play with a dog or a cat, you can elevate serotonin levels and dopamine levels, which cause calmness and relaxation. Pet owners have a lower triglyceride and cholesterol level, which are key indicators of heart disease. They also assist with helping heart attack patients survive longer than those without. And pet owners over 65 make 30% fewer visits to the doctors as well. And when we think about caring for a pet, we think, I'm going to get this dog because I really want a dog and it's super awesome and this cat's going to be like my best buddy. And then all of a sudden you think about it and you're like, oh man, I gotta get all this stuff for the animal. I gotta get all these products, these supplies. Where am I going to put everything? How is it going to change my life? How am I going to, be affected by this? All the exercise you get to do when you take your dog out, for a walk or a hike or a run. There's a lot of people that take their cats out for hikes as well. They have these really cute little backpacks. And I guess you just put the cat in there. And it has like air vents on the side and like a little window. And the cat can look out, but it's secured, so the cat's not just gonna freak out and jump and run away in the middle of the woods, which would be pretty crazy. But the animals themselves, besides the exercise regimen and requirements, they do provide companionship. They can help prevent illness and add years to your life because, isolation and loneliness can trigger symptoms of depression. When you care for an animal, you it helps make you feel needed and wanted. It takes the focus away from your problems, and especially if you live alone, most dog and cat owners talk to their pets. Some even use them to work through their troubles. I've found myself having whole conversations with my dog, like, not that I expect him to respond, but, more like in a cute way, like, oh, did you enjoy your dinner tonight? And I don't necessarily live alone, but I find that speaking to my dog like that makes me feel a deeper connection to him, and the daily walks help as well. There's a bond there when you're both going through the same thing, when you're both like doing the work, and pet ownership can help you meet new people as well. It's a fantastic social lubricant to help you start or maintain new friendships. A lot of dog owners and we're going to probably keep mentioning dogs as the main portion, but again, it's not the only pet you can have. And, they frequently stop and they talk to each other on hikes or, in the dog park. You can meet new people at the pet store or clubs or training classes. So it's a nice way to actually have a different kind of bond and maybe get out of your comfort zone and, who knows who you meet. They do help reduce anxiety, and they do add structure and routine to your day. If you want to get a dog, but you work 80 hours a week, that's probably not the best for the dog or you. I mean, either it's going to be in the cage all day, or it's going to be running around the house, potentially destroying all your valuables. Who knows? It could be very well behaved. But at the end of the day, if you're not there for your dog, and you're just working all the time, is there really a point in having the dog? You could go for something like a fish, or a bird that doesn't need as much companionship time, I should say. They're still available, but they're not as hectic to take care of. And also, speaking of that, but touching animals, the sensory and sensory stress relief from stroking a dog or a cat or other animal can also lower blood pressure and help you feel calmer and less stressed because they're just so adorable. Having a pet can also help you lose weight. There was a few studies done on this, a year-long study, actually, by the Wellness Institute of Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. And they found that dogs provide support in similar ways to a human exercise buddy, but with greater consistency and without any negative influence. A different study at a similar place, they found that public housing residents who walked their therapy dogs for up to 20 minutes, 5 days a week, lost an average of 14.4 pounds in a year without changing their diets. And a third study conducted by a dog manufacturer, Mars Pet Care, found that people with a dog walked 30 minutes more per week than they did before owning a dog. And when we get into animals, we can think of other alternatives like snakes and lizards. They seem cold, but there's been people that have these types of animals, and they actually can see that they grow attached to their owners. They can recognize who cares for them and who's feeding them and handling them. And some may even raise their necks up to be petted. All animals, I think, are capable of emotion and caring and would make, maybe not necessarily good pets, but they would allow you to find deeper connections with things that you hadn't really thought before. You could also get a rabbit, which is a nice alternative for people who are allergic to dogs or cats. They're not as high maintenance, but they do have a lot of energy and personality. And luckily, they don't take up a lot of space. So if you have a studio apartment or just a tiny room, you only need 4x4 feet of space to give your bunny the best life ever, right? They do help reduce stress hormone cortisol and increase serotonin, which is the happy hormone, just by snuggling up in them. You could also do birds or fish as well for a nice pet. And I mean, let's be honest here, owning a pet can help you find joy in your life and meaning. It helps you stay connected. It helps you boost your vitality. You're not just going to be running around all sad and mopey, and when we think about the longevity of pets and how long they've been around, the human-animal bond can be observed in definitely working animals and stuff. But the oldest known dog and a few other animals, this was back in 2011, but the oldest rabbit was a 16-year-old miniature gray rabbit, which was the oldest living rabbit on record. There was also, let's see where I found it, the world's oldest dog died peacefully at age 30. Her name was Maggie. She was an Australian Kelpie. She lived on a dairy farm. Now, had her age been able to be verified? So Maggie's age couldn't be verified because the owner lost the paperwork. So technically, the current record holder actually goes to an old dog named Bluey, which is an Australian cattle dog who coincidentally lives also in Victoria, Australia, like Maggie, the dog we just mentioned. But Bluey lived from 1910 to 1939 and died at the age of 29 years and 5 months. And that is quite a record. And can you imagine all the stuff that they saw and all the things that they experienced? That would be crazy. There was also a goldfish that lived for 43 years. And generally, birds as well are going to live longer sometimes than their owners. They have a really long active cycle. I have factual information on that as well. So, for instance, a 69-year-old female Lasian albatross currently holds the record as the oldest known bird, but there was a pink cockatoo. I don't know how these numbers don't make sense, but the pink cockatoo's name was Cookie, and she lived to be 83. And red-tailed hawks have been recorded to living up to 30 years as well. Parrots, like macaws, are some of the longest living species. They live an average of 50 years, but they also have been known to live up to 100 years old. So if you're looking for a pet that's going to stick around for your whole life, that might be a good option as well. And when we think about, like, when did we really start, like, domesticating animals, and when did we start, like, trying to have them in our lives? The greatest reliable, let me see here. There's all these numbers and crazy figures. It says most Americans own some 78 million dogs and 85 million cats, 14 million birds, 12 million small mammals, and 9 million reptiles. But when we look at what's been around the longest and the story of domestication, there is some discrepancy that I've seen as far, but it's a toss-up between dogs and sheep being the earliest domesticated animals. I'm not quite sure where cats fall into that range, but I know that people in ancient Egypt had cats and they worshipped them, and that wasn't that long ago. But we're talking, like 32,000 years. We're not talking semi-recent. So, yeah, dogs and sheep, earliest domestication. And when we look at non-animal things, like when we talk about, exotic animals, we'll get into that coming up, as well as non-animal things that you can take care of, and inanimate objects, and how that helps you be a better person as well.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
did you guys know that you can have some exotic pets? I looked up a list of exotic and strange pets that people can own. I have just a very small list for you real quick to get into, but the capybara it's one of the largest rodents. It can weigh up to 140 pounds. They're so cute though. They have like these little like kind of rectangular squared off faces and these cute little tiny paws. I believe they're native to Australia. I could totally be incorrect about that, but you can also get things like bearded dragons. Fennec foxes are actually a good pet as well, and that's interesting that fennec foxes actually can find true north. They are apparently good at scouting that, and when they go to get their prey, they actually jump up in the air and then head dive into the ground, which is kind of adorable and goofy. You could also do like a wallaby, a chimpanzee, a hedgehog, macaws or chinchillas are some of the pets. But when you look, you could do tarantulas, you could do sugar gliders, axolotls, pygmy goats. You could do a miniature donkey. Some people even have skunks as pets. If you look up your local ordinance law for exotic pets, there's actually a list online, depending on your state or country, of what exotic pets you can or can't own by law in that particular region. And definitely give it a look and let me know what you guys think and what you guys find out. What kind of pets can you have where you live? I would love to hear from you on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, for sure. So, let's say you can't have a pet. Let's say that you don't want to spend money on it. You're not really into animals, but you want to do something right. And when the pandemic hit, that was like a huge influx of change for everybody. And actually, during that time, more millennials are buying into what they single quote as plant parenthood, not Planned Parenthood, plant parenthood. So there'll be people just out, and there's articles of people like saying, they're like, I can't stop buying plants now. You know, the number of people between 18 and 34 who are buying plants to take care of them. A lot of them are in New York, and they're adding these greens because it decorates up their place. In part, it helps with having something to actually do during the time and take care of things. You know, and we don't think that caring for plants can have any impact on us, but you know, they do provide us oxygen. And actually, in a quick summary, to offset like a human, right? A person would need to be in a room with about 5,000 to 10,000 leaves, which could be about 300 to 500 plants would typically produce the right amount of oxygen. But that's harder to estimate the amount of carbon dioxide the plants absorb, especially if every time a person breathes out, they inhibit oxygen production, right? So typically it's 20 humans need about 17 kilograms of oxygen per day between them, which is less than 1,000. Hold on. Yeah, it says MOL is a unit of measurement. I don't know what that stands for, so I can't help you with that right now. But at any rate, you know, we have some plants in our house as well here, but you know, typically even like watching something as simple as like bamboo grow can give you a satisfaction. It can increase your interest. It can help you to formulate different kinds of bonds, and in particular, you know, grow as a person. And during the pandemic, pets still remained really high in demand as well. That had a huge effect on the industry. You know, millions of pets were adopted. However, I will note that each year approximately 1.5 million shelter animals are euthanized, which is why I brought up the whole spaying and neutering your pet thing. Also, I will note that according to the internet, some pets can get COVID, but the most only had mild illness and recovered if they actually did get it. So that's still a whole thing. And when we look at things that we own and things that we take care of, inanimate objects can be part of that as well, which, you don't think about your couch or your toaster or your coffee pot, right? You just think, oh, it's just something I have. We don't really take the time to stop and think about it and appreciate it, right? So Webster's dictionary, Merriam-Webster, I should say, dictionary since 1828 defines personal belongings as a plural noun, and it's items that belong to someone and that are small enough to be carried is the technical definition, which I think somewhat summarizes it. It does a fairly good job of it. And the reason I bring up the Professor and the Madman movie, which is a film that recently came out with, oh goodness, I just totally forgot his name for a minute. Mel Gibson. Oh my goodness. Mel Gibson and Sean Penn are in it. And it's based on a true story about how like the dictionary got made. And we'll get into that in a little bit. It was really fascinating. It was such a fantastic movie. I liked it a lot. I would definitely suggest checking it out. And personal belongings can look different to anybody. A typical example would be a favorite quilt or cushions or books. You could have pictures of your children or grandchildren or other important pictures. You could have, like I said, your own furniture, a computer or television. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody. And some of those things we may not be able to physically carry, but it's things that belong to us. And why should this mean anything to us, right? Like, why should we care about our coffee table or our blender or like our record player or something? Well, when we take care of things, when we take care of our belongings, it can help build our character. We avoid wasting money. We help generally to remain careful and thoughtful individuals who know how to prioritize and stay humble in daily life. And it can be extremely useful for, someone to know how to repair those things as well. And taking the time to care for these items, you can impart something called personalization on your objects. And I recently kind of just found out about this. And taking care of anything can be good for you. Taking care of your body means increased energy levels and a better ability to accomplish our daily goals. It can mean better ability to concentrate on any given task, or that it will take less time. Taking care of others can help those relationships in a myriad of ways. It helps keep anger and tension at bay. There was an experiment that researchers have found that inducing happiness in individual romantic partners by showing them happy imagery made them feel better about their relationship. So seeing those things and having those things around and taking care of those things can really bring joy and importance to your life. And I want to read this article real quick. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it was very well written. I don't have an exact date for the reference writing. I didn't see that anywhere on here, or if I did, I completely forgot that I saw it and I missed it. So no, I just double checked. Okay, so it's from the spiritualityandpractice.com. It's just a local resource I found, but it talks about, handling things with care, right? And it gives you suggestions on honoring your material things for beauty and expressiveness and creativity. And I'm going to read it verbatim because I thought that it was so well written to this extent. So there is a rich and soulful emphasis in the world's wisdom traditions on respecting inanimate objects. Many Christians see the sacramental value, and again, I'm not stating just for Christians. I'm going to include all religions in this, so that's my only caveat. Many Christians see the sacramental value of things that sign as God's presence. Jewish mystics speak of the divine spark that resides in everything. Hindus take great pleasure in ordinary objects as manifestations of Brahman. Sufis kiss cups and musical instruments as part of their practice of adab, and Native Americans and Confucians show courtesy for all things as part of their way of living. Somehow, in the push and shove of our days, we have lost this reverence for possessions. Instead, we hear about the overemphasis upon materialism in modern societies. This is a valid ethical critique, but there is also another perspective which does not get as much play. Both Sean McNiff and Thomas More, two of our living spiritual teachers, are advocates of a, quotation, soulful materialism, where the objects in our homes are appreciated and cherished for their beauty, expressiveness, life, and creativity. They, along with the French Catholic priest Teilhard de Chardin, I hope I didn't mispronounce that too badly, challenge us to reframe our ideas and habits in light of the recognition that, quote, things have their within. Now, poets and painters have been great of service as we shift our perspective on things. They encourage us to pay closer attention to the commonplace objects that surround us and spend some time with the paintings of Vincent van Gogh, where he conveys the beauty and the energy of a coffee pot, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a pipe and pouch. The poet Rainier Maria Rilke reminds us that we give new birth to objects by gazing upon them with delight. Like us, things need love and affirmation. And instead of cultivating an I-thou relationship with the things around us, regarding them as companions and friends, many of us still act out what spiritual teacher Larry Dossey calls a thing apartheid, whereby our possessions and the tools of our trade are seen merely as resources to be exploited and discarded when they are of no further use. This philosophy is reflected in the lack of care we give to our lamps and the refrigerator, the television set, the rugs, and the toaster in our homes. So we aspire to adapt a new attitude toward the things in our lives, and we remember the robot in the movie Bicentennial Man, whose motto is, "One is glad to be of service." Our things are providing us with services, and we owe them gratitude. And I will stop the reading at that point. But the first part is creating a welcoming ceremony for your new possessions. Express your appreciation for the new object and acknowledge its importance or meaning to you. And if you're inclined to, you could also say a prayer over this new possession and place and purpose within the creation. The second step is to respect your things. In the Sufi practice of adab, objects are seen as manifestations. So if you can kiss the tea glass from which they drink or the carpet on which they've just prayed. The dervish don't put out a candle. She, he, or they, them, quote, puts it to rest. So you can come up with your own informal practices. These are just some general ideas of how to put respect toward your objects. And the third thing is you want to anoint your house with beautiful things. So you want to fill your life with beauty and have objects and fragrances and movements and sounds and emotions around your house. You want to give those reflections and emotions and draw out those feelings for others. Fourth thing you can do is to bring a bit of enchantment to the office. If you do work in an office still and you're not doing everything remotely these days, bringing houseplants to your desk, bringing family photos to your desk, things that you want to carry with you that you have a good energy or more emotional vibration from can help to make all the difference in the world when you're there at work and you're having a tough day. And then you can look at these objects and you can remember how happy they make you, and maybe it'll take the bad parts away a little bit more. The fifth thing here is appreciating what's called wabi-sabi. Leonard Cohen is an expert on the Japanese aesthetic, which he defines as a beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. It is the beauty of things modest and humble. So they have in his example, they have a chipped teapot that they've had for years, and it still has a special place in their heart. So you can also identify favorite objects that you have in your home, which is called wabi-sabi. You can hold a party for all of your things. You can get all the stuff out of your house, like your mixer and your blender and your utensils or whatever, and you can give them a good cleaning and make sure that the cords are in good shape if anything needs changing out. And you can even, have fun with it and give out exceptional service awards. You can be like, this coffee pot makes the best coffee every single time, and I'm super happy for it. And like, coffee pot, like, you just did the most amazing job. And it sounds kind of silly. But the last thing you can do is to apologize to the offended objects. You want to ponder the courtesy that should characterize our interactions with inanimate objects. If you slam a door, for instance, you should return to it, open it, and close it properly, and apologize to it for your insensitivity. If you kick up the corner of a rug or something too, to, behaving thoughtlessly, especially if it's in anger or otherwise, you must correct the behavior and apologize to the offended object.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
We are back. We are just finishing up a list of ways to be generous and compassionate with your everyday objects. We just ran through about 7 of them. I'm not going to recap them right now. You can go back and listen to section 3 of this podcast episode, or just rewind like 15 minutes and you'll find it. But we are going to finish up the list here. We've got 3 more to get through, and then we're going to get into a couple other things as well for how to care for things, and more so kind of on the same track we've been when we give emotions to objects and we care for our things, and the caring of words and the caring of what jobs we do, right? So number 8 on caring for objects and spiritual practices is to be generous with those who maintain your things. Gardeners, maids, pool maintenance workers, other service providers are the ones who, are responsible for caring for the upkeep of our possessions. So you can be generous of tipping, but if you don't employ such workers, you can reward the hotel who makes the beds and vacuums their rooms and cleans the bathrooms while you're away from your home. Be respectful of these people. They're out there, they're working, they're trying, they're doing their best, and they're hopefully doing amazing things. And what not to do with your things. The absolute value of all things and the respect with which must be given to them. To truly practice Zen, therefore, means not leaving lights burning where they are not needed, not allowing water to run unnecessarily from the faucet, not loading up your plate and leaving food uneaten. Those are all bad habits that are harmful, and that need to get changed in your household. You can work on one thing a week, depending on how many things you think you have. But it's really about being more in tune and being more grateful for those things, no matter how much or how little it is. And you want to also be able to pass your things on to others. Another way that you can honor them is that when they're no longer in use is to let them go so others can appreciate them. For instance, you can give yourself just one day to open every drawer, cupboard, and closet in your home. Inventory all your stuff with an eye toward letting it go. And if you absolutely need something, leave it where it is. But if you haven't used something in a year and you have no emotional attachment to it, put it in the recycling pile. If you haven't used it in a year but you do have an emotional attachment to it, put it in the maybe pile. Spend a little time with each item, and especially in the maybe pile, spend a little time with each one and let the feelings connect to it flow. Notice whether the attachment is one that seems to shut you down or open you up. If it's the former, consider adding that item to the recycling pile. And then when you're all done, recycle everything and revel in your newfound spaciousness. Now, Marie Kondo does a lot of this. She does a lot of home cleaning and organizing as well. But, we all have a favorite pair of shoes or a favorite hat or jacket, or there's one or two items, or maybe a handful of items, maybe 30 items that you might have around your house that you, no matter how many times you wear it or look at it or use it, you absolutely love it. So when we talk about those kinds of feelings and you're working through how to clean and organize your house, and you want to get rid of some stuff, and you want to feel like you have just enough things, well, that's another nice way to do it. If you think of it in similar ways like that, if those certain items are evoking those feelings, and when you go to your maybe pile, your recycling pile, if you're not feeling those same attributations, well, then maybe it's time to let it go. And maybe it's time to move it on and let it go to somewhere where it could be of use and be appreciated and be happy. It doesn't have to be forever. It could be for a short time. But it's important to make those changes as well, because sometimes we do get overcrowded with stuff. There are a lot of shows on TV, a lot of cases where people have put too much emphasis on inanimate objects, and then they get into, I think it's called synesthesia. It's synaesthesia, if I remember correctly. And it's basically where, you're almost like hoarding at some point. You just have so many things in your home, and there's little walkways, and you can barely do anything else. And, there are people that can help with that. But in general, it's good to go through your things, and it's good to take stock of what you have and say to yourself, do I really need this? Do I really appreciate this still? Is this serving any use for me? And if it's not, don't be afraid to let it go. So, real quick, I know we just briefly mentioned it, but the Professor and the Madman, right? It's about how the dictionary was made. And there's James Murray, and then there's Dr. William Chester Minor, both played by Mel Gibson and Sean Penn, respectively. And Mel Gibson's character is a lexicographer, I think I said that right, and a philosophist, if I remember correctly. And he ends up joining this group of men to create a dictionary of words, formally. Compiling the first words for the edition of the Oxford English Dictionary in the mid-19th century. Now, Charles Minor was originally from the United States. He went overseas and fought in, I believe, some of France's wars. And he ended up being committed because he accidentally shot someone that he mistakenly thought was someone that broke into his house. So he was charged and committed, and he ended up going to a mental institution for a while. However, he was responsible for over 10,000 words himself, just in the dictionary. And if you watch the film, it goes through the whole process of how do we even start? Because there's so many words. We have 26 letters to go through. How broad are we going to use this? How far back are we going to go with this? The 12th, the 13th, the 14th century for words? You need to verify dates. You need to verify when the words were first used, how they're cross-referenced. You need to have a timeline for it. And it's such a fascinating story because we never really, we change words all the time. There actually are still lexicographers. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but no disrespect intended. And a lot of those people that do it, they could be doctors, they could be lawyers, they could be part-time students, and you can actually still apply for these jobs. They're a college, I believe, that offered it specifically. But what's interesting is that even if you studied in lexicography, you may not necessarily be hired to be one because it's too stringent. And they actually want someone to be hired in that can have a little more flexibility and a little more creativity toward it. There's a really fine balance in what is acceptable for being a lexicographer. And a lot of times they'll spend upwards of it is a very solitary and lonely job. You do a lot of your work sitting at a desk, and you're not interacting with people, and there's not these large debates going on of oh, I saw the word aesthetic back in this 12th century book, but then it didn't appear again until the 15th century. It's not anything like that. It does portray that a little bit somewhat in the movie, but it was such a fantastic watch because it just made me more curious. I did even try to see if they had a list of books that Miner had read, but it turned out some of it was just his own personal collection. And what's interesting is that you'd think something not necessarily at the time being recognized as something historical like that, you'd think there would just want to be tons and tons of information on it, what books did you get those from? Do they even still exist? How did you do all that? And you're in the middle of an asylum because you murdered the wrong guy, and yet you were a contributor to society and to today's world too. I was going to use another word and then I forgot what it was going to be. So and think about that for a minute, right? And it's not too late for anybody. It doesn't matter what you have going on. You can contribute. You can affect things. You can give yourself greater meaning. You can find a passion. You can push forward and do things. Even again with the pandemic and stuff. I just saw a video the other day. This lady, she's she's big on TikTok and stuff, right? And she's yeah, I was bored during the pandemic and I started making these little blankets. And then she's I decided to make a big one. So she hand makes her own loom, and I don't remember the size. It's probably 8x6 or 10x8 or something. So, she makes these little pom-pom blankets, and she posts them online, and you get to just watch her weave all this thread in and out all the way over across. And then she makes certain snips, and then all of a sudden you have these cute little colorful balls on the blankets, and I'm assuming she sells them. But I don't think that in her initial life she was considering, oh hey, I'm just gonna go make blankets for a living, or the people that do wood carvings. Or I just went to a festival yesterday, first one of the year. There were still people in masks, there was still sanitizer. There was people not wearing masks too, so really it's up to the business owner at this point. Do what you feel is safe and correct, and just try to be a respectful human being, right? And even in there, we have all these booths and stuff that have all these homemade items. There was tons of gems. There was a lot of homemade things different kind of alcoholic desserts, stuff for pets. There was you could bring your dog, which was great. So we got in some good walking time. But, it doesn't take much, and you don't have to be someone super special. Think of it. This guy was in an insane asylum, and he's contributing. It's crazy. That's so crazy. And it's so underrated, and that's not the case for everything. There are people with legitimate disorders and chemical imbalances that factorially may not be as useful as someone else, and that's unfortunate to say. I don't mean any disrespect, but the point of the matter is if whether or not you're saying thank you to the can of beer you just drank, or the bamboo plant you're trying to grow, or the kitten you just got and you're trying to feel her out and figure out what it's all about, take your journey, do different things, stretch out of your comfort zone. If there's something that you feel you're lacking, or or missing, try to identify that. You don't have to go get a pet right away. You can get a houseplant. You could go find like a really cool rock and carry it around and just appreciate the rock for a while. You know what I mean? And I don't expect anyone to do that, but I'm just trying to give like a random example, It doesn't matter. It has to matter for you. And becoming a better person and characterizing things and growing, all have different mediums and outlets. You could pick up painting, and you may think, oh, okay, well, I'm no Bob Ross or Monet, but does it matter? Heck, you could sit there with a bottle of wine or something and just paint. Actually, they have a bunch of classes like that now, and you can go and meet new people, and it's called sit and paint or sip and paint, and you can bring like some kind of alcoholic beverage, and you just sit there and you paint. You all kind of paint the same thing, and it all turns out a little bit differently, but somewhat similar. And I think that's the best part of humanity, is that, we are all the same, but we're all just a little bit different. But really, we're all the same. So that kind of hurts your brain after a while. So I hope you guys have learned a lot for this episode. I hope you guys have a newfound sense of happiness and are looking to spring forth into the world and have the rest of the best year ever. I hope that you've enjoyed this section of pets, and maybe you're thinking about getting one, or you've had one, you want another one, or whatever the case. Maybe you are inspired to be more grateful toward the things in your house, like your TV or your couch, that we take for granted. I don't know. But I want to thank you guys so much for this. And, don't be afraid to get out there, and don't be afraid to contribute. Don't be afraid to be your best self. And I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into and listening to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please feel free to subscribe to the show, write a nice review, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It really helps us out. Thank you guys so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find the show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast.